After a disappointing football season, it's time to just declare it. It appears we're a basketball school. More in a moment on this week's edition of Michigan Podcast next.
But there's going to be one team that's going to play solely as a team. No man is more important than the team. No coach is more important than the team. The team, the team, the team.
Looks deep for Anthony Carter. Waits for it, gets caught.
This is no time for that. In the pocket and a sack. Tim Jamison.
Brady gets terrific. Throws it, get it, touchdown, Knight again. Schultz just before Brazil got him, and a leaping interception by Woodson.
Harbaugh back to throw over the middle, caught by Collier at the 5 on his feet, touchdown Michigan. On its way. It's good.
He's 5'7", 179 pounds, a junior at Michigan. But Jamie Morris packs a wallop, and he delivers for Bo Schembechler.
And here's your first play. Pressure coming. Sack. It is Glenn Steele, number 81, who fought his way through the traffic.
Option. And Robinson calls his own number, and he's going to score. Oh, an easy touchdown for Robinson and Michigan.
Win it. We're going to win the championship again because we're going to play as a team. And when we play as a team and the old season is over, you and I know it's going to be Michigan again. Michigan.
Go Blue. Happy New Year. Hope you had a great Christmas break as we did. Welcome to a brand new year and another new episode of Michigan Podcast. I am Steve Deace. Michael Spath will be joining us here in the Roundtable portion of the program coming up a little bit later on, plus our Twitter poll, your question of the week still to come as well. But let's begin with what I mentioned here right at the tease. A 4-loss season in football. After a 3-loss season, after a 5-loss season, after a 3-loss season, and after a 3-loss season. If you would have told me on December 30th, 2014, that 5 years into the Jim Harbaugh era, we would have lost at least 3 games every year. 0 Big Ten championships, 0 trips to the Big Ten championship game, 0 wins over Ohio State, including 2 of the worst losses back-to-back in the history of this once illustrious rivalry. I would have never believed it or assumed you had bought a low-grade street form of meth and ingested it heavily before offering that prediction. Yet, here we are. That's our reality. We're now celebrating the fact, hey, we led at the half. We've got the illustrious Dan Deerdorf, one of the great warriors in Michigan football history, going on WTKA and hoping and praying for moral victories. Hey, if we could just keep it close against Alabama, that would be great. I'm broken. As a fanalist, as a Michigan fanalist, I am broken. I've lost my hope that Michigan football is going to get there again. I am now convinced we're losing at least 3 games every season the rest of my life at this point. And I don't even think there is an Ohio State game anymore. I'm not even analyzing it, predicting it. This whole offseason, I'm just going to treat it like Michigan has an 11-game schedule because that's pretty much what we have. So if this was a divine construct to humble me, it worked. I'm pretty humbled right now. I mean, I'm about as humble as it gets. I'm broken. That's why I'm excited to turn the page. Let's talk some basketball, where apparently the recruiting is even more corrupt than it is in college football, yet Juwan Howard, in his very first attempt, can apparently sign a top 5 class in the country when he's been on the job for 10 minutes, but we can't seem to get that every year or most years out of Jim Harbaugh because everybody cheats, except in college basketball. We can do it where we know everybody cheats. Anyway, Michigan took it on the chin against Michigan State at the Breslin Center on Sunday. Still, this has been a tremendous beginning for Michigan basketball in Juwan Howard's first season. And you look right now, they're still the only team to beat number 1 Gonzaga so far this year. They look like they're going to be a lock for the NCAA tournament, which to me, that was the big goal for year 1, is I thought Juwan had to make the NCAA tournament in year 1 because he was going to have a ton of buzz and star power, but he needed to establish some coaching credibility as well. And that's the baseline accomplishment for a college basketball coach these days, is lead your team to the big dance. So I think Michigan seems destined for there. It's just a matter of, what is this team's ceiling? Well, right now it's lower than we would like, as long as Isaiah Livers is out. Isaiah Livers is the best scorer in the program. He's one of the best perimeter scorers in the Big Ten Conference, which, by the way, if you've not noticed, and we're going to be getting into this much more with the debut of Bigger 10 tomorrow, right here on the same YouTube channel. We're going to expand to look at the entire Big Ten horizon each and every week. You don't want to miss out on that beginning tomorrow. That's Wednesday for those of you that are watching this a little bit later on in the week. But if you haven't noticed, the Big Ten Conference is as loaded in basketball as I can ever remember it. I don't know that there's a gimme game. I don't think Northwestern and Nebraska are very good. But remember, Nebraska beat reigning Big Ten co-champion Purdue at home earlier this season. Northwestern played Michigan State tough at home. You cannot simply take any game in this conference for granted. And so when you're without 15 points a game right now, as Michigan is without Isaiah Livers, and you're still trying to have your young wing players find their way, like a Franz Wagner, a Cole Bajema, etc., your margin for error shrinks considerably. And the last place you want to go play a basketball game when your margin for error is shrinking is the Breslin Center. So Michigan probably got the result many of us anticipated against Michigan State, but don't let that take away from what has been a spectacular beginning to the season. Michigan playing one of the toughest schedules in the country, notching several key, huge victories already, soaring as high as number 4 in the AP poll. Let's face it, that was probably too high. I think we rank number 19 heading into this week, but the real rankings that matter are the KenPom analytics and the net rankings that the NCAA uses to seed and select the field come Selection Sunday, which is only about 70 some odd days from now. It's not as far away as you might think here in early January. And in both of those metrics, the Wolverines factor among the top 20 teams in the country. And a big reason why is that guy that's on my shoulder over here. My nickname for him is son-in-law. I'd be fine if he met one of my daughters someday, because I absolutely love Xavier Simpson. I can't get enough. I love the way he plays. And to me, he's the embodiment of what you want Michigan basketball to be. Doesn't mean he's not a player that is flawless. He's not. But what is flawless is the effort, the focus, the leadership, the fact that he gives you absolutely everything he has, and then the creativity, the ingenuity he has with those floaters and hook shots around the basket. I just love watching him play. And that's why I never understood. I mean, I get it, why there was some skepticism when you lose arguably the best coach in college basketball right now, John Beilein, and you're bringing a guy that's never been a head coach on any level. I get why there's skepticism. I just never understood why people were picking us 8th in the Big Ten. You're not finishing 8th in the Big Ten when you have one of the top 10 point guards in the country. All right. It's a point guard driven sport, and we've got one of the best. That's why this season is going to turn out to be far more successful than all those preseason magazines and pundits predicted. And it's why when we get Isaiah Livers back, there's not a game on the schedule Michigan can't win. Doesn't mean Michigan won't win them all. They won't. The league is too tough. But it does mean this team is a lot better than it was expected to be. And if you look at the way Juwan Howard is recruiting right now, it's going nowhere. This is going to be one of the more talented rosters in the Big Ten for the foreseeable future. In fact, Depending on how this goes at the end with guys like Josh Christopher, Michigan could end up signing the most talented class to come into the Big Ten, according to the 24/7 composite, in 15 years. Think about that. So yes, football seems doomed. Doomed to the friend zone. But hey, it's okay. We're a basketball school now. If you like what we do here at Michigan Podcast and you want to support us in any way, please consider joining our Patreon page, patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. All one word. You can use any dollar amount whatsoever. But if you are into sports handicapping, you want to get a hold of the picks that I put up there exclusively almost every day now that we're into college basketball season, and they're doing fairly well this season. You can get access to those for just $5 a month at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. I want to thank all of you, hundreds of you that are supporting us right now on our Patreon page. We appreciate your kindness. It definitely helps us to continue putting in the effort to put out Michigan Podcast every week. For the rest of you, please consider supporting us as well at patreon.com/Michigan Podcast. Back here on Michigan Podcast, time for the Roundtable portion of this week's episode. And we're going to be down a man the next couple of weeks because Brandon Brown, our colleague here at Wolverine Digest, decided to go ahead and have a family. So we congratulate the Brown family for their latest edition and wish them well. Sully was born on Monday, I believe, Michael Spath, correct?
Correct, yes.
And mom and dad, everybody's doing good? Everybody's fine?
Yeah, from everything, he's been very quiet. I think he's, very much consumed by his new son and taking care of his wife. But sounds like everybody is happy and healthy, and hopefully a future Wolverine.
Which brings us to you. You've had some news as well. You got a Christmas present, a very special one this past year as well. You and your wife, Amy, had your first child on Christmas Day. So congratulations to you, too.
We did. Yeah, we did. Very, I don't want to say unexpected, because anytime you get within like a week of the due date, anything is fair game. But my wife thought she was going to do everything in her power to keep him inside for a few more days. And then on Christmas morning that the water broke, and boom, a couple hours later, John Robert Spath joined the world. So it's been a blessing. He's about 2 weeks old, and we couldn't be any more in love, any happier than to have this little guy.
So I think the big question everybody's watching us around the country wants to know, if you're born on Christmas Day and that's your birthday, does that mean you get to double up on the presents, or does that mean you get the shaft because your parents go 2 for 1? How does it work? How's it going to work in the Spath household?
We've had a lot of discussions about it, honestly, how to make sure that he feels like he's getting his just desserts on his birthday. We've talked about doing a half birthday in June. We've talked about doing, treating the morning like Christmas morning and the afternoon and evening like John's birthday. We don't really have the best answer yet. We're going to figure this out as we go along. The good news is that, next year, the year after that, maybe even that third year, he's really not going to know too much about his birthday versus Christmas. So I think he'll just be happy that there's a big party going on.
Sounds good. Well, congratulations to all of you as well. It's been a busy couple weeks around Wolverine Digest with a lot of the comings, and everybody is healthy and happy, and it's a very cool time and a very welcome distraction from what we are about to discuss, and that's Michigan football. And, you and I have done, and you're doing them every day on WTKA, I'm sure. It's just hard to escape the big picture here. If you would have told me on December 30th, 2014, that in 5 years, Jim Harbaugh would lose, that's the day we hired him. And if you'd have told me on that day that he would lose 3 or more games every year, never beat Ohio State, including suffering 2 of the worst defeats Michigan's ever had in the series, never even getting to the Big Ten championship game, let alone winning it, I would have had everybody that made that prediction drug tested, or I would have blocked them on Twitter because it was clear they were just trying to troll me. And yet, Michael, this is our reality. Is it just time to declare ourselves a basketball school?
man, I don't know. I don't ever want to give up completely. I mean, there's a lot of resignation going on as a fan base right now, and I certainly,
believe me, I'm pretty resigned. I'm pretty resigned.
Yeah. I'm part of that. I understand that. I understand the absolute frustration that has taken place. I've expressed those frustrations the last couple of weeks or so. I think when you look at this program, there's two things that stand out. Either Michigan is not talented enough to be able to compete with Ohio State, compete with Alabama. That record against the top 10 teams under Harbaugh, 2-12 against top 10 teams. So they're either not talented enough to beat those teams, or they haven't established a culture of winning yet. They haven't established a mental toughness culture yet in 5 years' time in order to win in those critical moments, in order to I don't want to say play a flawless game, but to play winning football against the best teams you'll encounter. And so that's where I think we are 5 years into the Jim Harbaugh tenure, is that I think both of those things to some degree are true, but I think more than the talent argument, I think it's the culture argument. I know you're going to talk about, what Doug Skeen has said and some former players that are around this program, that analyze this program, and in critical moments, they're just not capable. They play a good half. I mean, let's look at the 4 losses this year. They played a good first half against Alabama. They played a good second half against Penn State. They played a good first 20 minutes, 25 minutes against Ohio State. They didn't really play a good anything against Wisconsin. That's just not going to win you football games. You can't play good for 20, 25, 30 minutes. You need to be able to have a culture where you play your best football for 60 minutes. And that's really been, I think, what is handicapped, what's held this program back. And that's something that has got to change. And the question is whether it'll change under this current coaching staff.
So culture and winning big games. You referenced Doug Skeen, Michigan's former all Big Ten offensive lineman, played in the NFL. He was a part of his redshirt year. He was on the teams that won 5 championships in a row at the end of the Bo era and into the Moeller era. So he knows a little bit, a thing or two about championship cultures. And he was with Chris Ballas over at the Wolverine, where you used to work as well, talking about this on his podcast, which, by the way, if you're a Michigan fan and you don't listen to the Skeen podcast, you're missing out. I mean, that dude's just a national treasure. He tells it like it is, man. He doesn't hold anything back. But he does it in a way that he wants Michigan to be successful. In other words, I do too. I just can't do it in that way because I'm a fan and I get butthurt. So he does it better than me. And he mentioned, hey, when you're performing like this in these marquee games and you're into year 5 and the players are coming and going, that starts at the top with the head coach and the culture that he establishes within a program to take a punch in a game like this. And when you were a student at Michigan, when you covered the team for the Wolverine, that was the Lloyd Carr era. And if you go back to the Lloyd Carr era until the end, when Jim Tressa was really getting it rolling at Ohio State, Lloyd Carr made his bones in games against top 10 teams. We were far more concerned. I'd go on the message boards at the Wolverine back in those days, ripping and trashing Lloyd for giving the ball to Will Carr at the goal line and losing to 3-8 Purdue. That was Lloyd. With Lloyd, we were always like, all right, what's the game we're going to lose this year that's going to blow it for us? We have no business losing. That's what you were concerned about with Lloyd Carr. But if his record against top 10 teams and highly ranked teams throughout his career was excellent. So when you were around the program then, when you went to school then, you covered the team. I know you know Lloyd well. What was the culture like in there that they excelled in these games? Because now it's the opposite. We don't lose any games we're not supposed to lose. And that we can't win any of the games we have to win. What did you see in the Lloyd Carr years that you can quantify from afar you just don't sense right now with Michigan?
I'm a big fan of Lloyd Carr. I think he did a great job. I think he was kind of like many coaches, like many quarterbacks, like many players. In the moment, you don't really realize what they're accomplishing, and then after the fact, you sit back and say, "Wow, that was pretty damn good." But I don't want to say it's simply a Lloyd Carr thing. Honestly, I think a lot of Michigan's success against top 10 teams and in the big games and beating Ohio State early in his career was passed down team to team, senior leadership to senior leadership that started with Bo Schembechler in 1969, and the winning culture that he developed over in the 1970s, the 1980s, that, even though that they were 8-4 for a couple of years in a row at the end of Gary Moeller and the beginning of Lloyd Carr, but players that were on those teams had won Big Ten championships, have beaten Ohio State, had played well in big games before, and I think they passed on that type of winning mentality to the next generation, and then the next generation carried it to that next generation. And let's face it, we're now going on 15 years without a Big Ten title. We're going on, it's been 8 years since Michigan beat Ohio State, and as hard as Jim Harbaugh is trying to get his team to understand these things, when you've got someone like Khalid Hudson, and he's one of your senior leaders, one of your senior captains, or Ben Bredesen on the offensive line is one of your senior leaders and your senior captains, and they have no idea what it's like to beat Ohio State, and they don't have this winning mentality in these big games. And when they're playing Ohio State or they're playing Alabama, they're just as prone as some of the younger guys to make mistakes because they've never gotten over that hump. They've never experienced like, okay, I've got to be this perfect in this moment to get there. They can talk about it, but if you've never experienced it, I think it's really hard to translate that into the game. And I think that's what's missing here. And how do you get that back? I mean, that's the hardest thing because we're now going back to the Rich Rod days. And really, if you want to say even like the last season of Lloyd Carr's career, losing to App State, Oregon, Ohio State, that's when it started to vanish. And so we're talking a decade plus of a, I don't want to say losing mentality culture, but certainly not a winning culture. And so he's got to break through somehow. And, can it be one game? Can it be two games? I mean, that's why that 2016 game against Ohio State, the 2018 games against Ohio State were so critical, because if you have those, you start to develop that winning mentality. I don't know how they get it back. I really don't. I wish I had the solution. I wish I was a paid consultant for Michigan football, but I don't know how they get it back until they just have one of those games that they win that they're not supposed to.
What you just said explains then why Doug said that this really begins with and ends with the head coach has to instill this culture, because he didn't inherit this. This wasn't part of the topsoil there. This wasn't in the habitat. He had to take over for Rich Rod and Brady, and so you didn't have legacies of players passing that legacy on, and so therefore it was up to Coach Harbaugh to establish that. And here we are into year 5, and it's not there. And you're right. If you and I knew how to do that, we'd be making $8-9 million a year doing his job instead of doing this. So let's get to some of the news that's come up around the football program and get your reaction analysis of what you think it means. Let's start with NFL draft comings and goings. Donovan Peoples-Jones is gone. He was the number 1 consensus wide receiver in his class in 2017. And he, over the course of his career, he basically put up the stats Jerry Jeudy had for Alabama last year when he won the Biletnikoff. You have Cesar Ruiz, who was the number 1 consensus center in the 2017 class. He's moving on to the NFL draft. We can debate whether he would have been better off taking another year. I think he would have been in order to get into the Senior Bowl. But, if you're going to be a second or third day draft pick anyway, might as well go ahead and get your clock started now for the second contract. So he's moving on. Nico Collins is returning. That's a big boost. He'll be the one true outside receiver for Michigan next year, who looks pretty loaded with slot guys, speed guys, and quick guys on the inside there. And then you also have Josh Uche. We know he's moving on. We have 5th years for Nick Eubanks and Carlo Kemp. They'll be returning. A 5th year for Michael Dwumfor. He'll be returning. Ambry Thomas has not made it official, but every time he's been asked, he's made it pretty clear he's coming back. Am I missing anybody? And then your kind of thoughts on, net win, net loss with NFL comings and goings, and how you think Michigan came out of this for the 2020 season.
You know what? The Josh Uche thing, when he announced he was leaving, I mean, he played in 4 games as a true freshman, so I never expected him to even have a year to come back. So I wasn't really thinking that was a loss because I didn't know he had a 5th year. Donovan Peoples-Jones, I mean, the immense talent, but 1 year you can say is a little bit of like an anomaly. 2 years is a trend, and for 2 years, I mean, he's put up 35 catches and about 600 yards. And whether it's him not performing, whether it's the coaches underutilizing him, whether it's bad quarterback play, I don't see that as a huge loss, because what was he going to come back and do next year? He was very likely going to be the number 3 wide receiver behind Nico Collins and Ronnie Bell, as he was this year, and maybe even the number 4, because I'm really high on Giles Jackson. I think this coaching staff is too, considering the way that they've been using him the last few weeks. So if you're losing a number 3, number 4 wide receiver, how big of a loss is that? I don't think it's a tremendous loss. I wish the very best of Donovan Peoples-Jones. I think he's got the physical traits that could make him a success in the NFL. I think the biggest loss out of this group is Cesar Ruiz. I think Nico Collins coming back helps you with the receiving core. He gives you a true number 1 if they can use him in that manner. But Cesar Ruiz to me is the big loss, because when you look at him, a center that can pull like he can, that was voted the best pass blocking center in the country by Pro Football Focus, which uses advanced analytics to decide those things. A guy who really he's held the position for two plus years. That to me is a guy that you really could have leaned on as a senior, especially when you're breaking in either 1 new starting quarterback or 2 new quarterbacks, when you're breaking in 3 other offensive line starters, both at guard and left tackle. Now losing Cesar Ruiz and having 4 offensive line starters to replace, I think that is a really, really tall order. Now, they're excited about this 2019 class that includes Carson Barnhart and Zach Carpenter and Nolan Rumler and these guys, but they're all going to be redshirt freshmen. They're all going to be making their first career starts in Washington, opening weekend, Labor Day weekend, with brand new quarterback under center. I think that's a lot to ask. If they're bringing back Cesar Ruiz and Jalen Mayfield, and they had Ryan Hayes who started a couple of games, I'd feel a lot better about this offensive line in the opener. I think they can blossom and emerge and get really good throughout the season. But I think they're crazy to suggest there's not going to be a drop-off from the unit they just had finishing this Alabama game to at least the first game next year in 2020.
What about the transfer portal? Michigan's got a couple of needs. We know that you mentioned offensive line. They'd probably like to maybe add a player there from an experience standpoint. We know that they've reached out to Devery Hamilton, who's one of, I think, the 75 Stanford players currently in the transfer portal, a former Michigan commitment, a former starter at Stanford. They started following today on Twitter, several Michigan coaches did, the grad transfer out of Vanderbilt that started, I think, 33 games for them that went into the portal earlier this week. We know they want some defensive tackle help. We mentioned Brandon, he's off for the next couple of weeks, but before him and his wife went off to have their baby, he wrote for our site at Wolverine Digest that he thought Michigan could land one of those 2 defensive tackles at Stanford that are in the transfer portal if they want them, because he's heavily coveting academics as well as athletics. There's a lot of talk that Ed Warner's son, who's in the transfer portal at Michigan State, a linebacker, may end up joining his father here at Michigan. So do you expect, it looks like Michigan's going to be, Michael, a pretty active player in the transfer portal, but I don't think it's going to be for quarterback. But what are your thoughts on Michigan in the transfer portal over the next couple of months?
Look, if they add the right pieces, I mean, it's the transfer portal's become a little bit like free agency. I mean, we kind of talked about this when it first happened 3 years ago, but the way that the NCAA is granting eligibility pretty consistently, not just to grad transfers, but to guys who just kind of petition them, if they have any justification, if they have any argument on their behalf, I think there's a really good possibility that Michigan adds 3 or 4 players to their roster for 2020. And if it is a pair of defensive tackles, if it is a pair of offensive linemen, if it is maybe a running back, if they add the right pieces and either McCaffrey or Milton turns out to be one of the top 10 quarterbacks in college football, there's a lot to like about the 2020 season, at least for the first 11 weeks. And then I don't want to even talk about Ohio State or potential against Ohio State or anything like that, because that's an entirely different ballgame. But there is a lot of potential for this team. But now they've got to add pieces, though. What they did in the recruiting cycle this year, they've got a couple more weeks for the second signing period, but they added 2 defensive tackles that are 235 pounds. Neither of those guys is helping Michigan in 2020. They're probably not even helping Michigan in 2021. In making a transition from defensive end to tackle and putting on the proper weight and all those different things. Along the offensive line, I mentioned they've got 14 bodies. They've got 6 offensive linemen they're really high on from this 2019 class. They've got a couple of redshirt juniors and Chuck Filiaga, Andrew Stuber, and Joe Honigford that can compete for playing time also. So they've got bodies, but they could really use experienced bodies. there's a pretty decent chance that they have a starting line next year that has less than, I think, 15 career total starts. I mean, that would be crazy if it's only the guys that they have now. But if they add a grad transfer or two, and they bring someone like Deveray Hamilton in, or the player from Vanderbilt, there's a lot more to like about this group, and they're kind of shoring up their needs. So let's see what happens. Let's see what transpires over the next few weeks. We should know, that these guys make these decisions before they get to spring practice, which starts in mid-March, because they want to go to practice. They want to be part of these teams, or they at least want to kind of, be part of that process in the spring and then join the teams in the summer. So we should know in the next couple of weeks where these guys go, but definitely Michigan needs to add some pieces if they want to shore up their weaknesses that they have right now and put themselves in a better position to be successful in 2020.
And then some coaching news. Chris Partridge moving on to be the co-defensive coordinator at Ole Miss, one of the true renegade programs in college football.
Yeah.
And he's going to work alongside DJ Durkin. This is his first job since the tragedy that occurred there at Maryland while he was the head coach there with Jordan McNair under his watch. So that's a lot of controversy. I know there's talk, I think even our beloved Sam Webb here in the Michigan media community was talking about, hey, I think that, Partridge could come back here after a year or two. I don't know about that. I there's just a certain way of doing business down there, and I don't know that you get a conscientious objector clause when you go down there. I don't think you get to say, well, I didn't want to pay off his mama, so that's why we didn't get the best player in the state of Mississippi. I don't think that dog gonna hunt. This is the school, by the way, that a guy walked up to Lane Kiffin the day he got hired with his baby and said, hey man, make sure you get a burner phone. Okay. So I'll be fascinated to see how that dynamic works, because he was selling the 40-year plan at Michigan, and now he's selling the bag man down there at Ole Miss, because that's what they sell. But he's gone, and he was Michigan's best recruiter in the Harbaugh era, so he's got to be replaced. The aforementioned Sam Webb says Anthony Campanile is down to Michigan or joining his brother Rutgers, or his brother at Rutgers on Greg Schiano's new staff. So what do you think about what's going on from a coaching perspective here in the offseason?
Yeah, I'm kind of with you on Chris Partridge. I mean, it's maybe an unfair, but guilt by association. It's one thing if you go down to the SEC and you go to Florida, maybe you go to Mississippi State, where Joe Moorhead took a ton of heat for not winning at the high level. I mean, there's a couple of programs that are maybe not quite tainted by scandal, but Ole Miss is like at the center of scandal.
Dude, other SEC schools turn Ole Miss in. That's all you need to know. All right.
Yeah.
I mean, they violate like the rules of the prison yard at Ole Miss. They get turned in by other schools at the SEC. Yeah. So.
Yeah. I mean, they were cheating their asses off under Hugh Freeze, and they got busted for it. And Lane Kiffin is, does not have a sterling reputation. So I don't think Chris Partridge comes back to Michigan someday. I really don't. So in that respect, how do you replace him? Well, it's interesting because you got to get a great recruiter. And the good news is that there's a lot of young coaches, guys in their 30s that are starting out that, that have these reputations of connecting with players and building those rapport that allow you to do that. But certainly he was their best. And so you're going to have to go out there and get a dynamic one. You need to steal a great recruiter from somebody else's staff and someone else that has connections in Georgia, maybe in Florida or Texas, or hell, can you get someone that has great connections in the state of Ohio, which Michigan for the most part has been ignoring the past few seasons on the recruiting circuit. You do that, and it's maybe a little bit of a wash. I'll say this. We had Sebastian Gaeta, who is a special teams coach at Brighton High School. They went to the state championship this year, and he just was in awe of what Chris Partridge did as a special teams coach. So I think there's going to be a big loss there, depending on who they bring in. Again, I'm in wait-and-see mode to see what Harbaugh does. He's made a lot of really good coaching hires. There's been a couple that haven't worked out, but generally they haven't worked out, and then within a year or two, those guys have moved on. I think Anthony Campanile could be. I don't want to say it's not working out, but I think it makes a lot of sense for him to go to Rutgers and join his brother. If he does, they'll bring in someone else. And I don't think that they need to bring in let's face it, the Northeast, where Don Brown and Anthony Campanile have some recruiting chops. I don't think that's what you want to do. I think you want to bring in someone that has a connection to Ohio And I think you want to bring in someone that has connection to like North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia. If Campanelli were to leave, that would be my 2 top priorities, is getting those guys that have connections in those areas of the country.
Let's get to basketball and what we've seen there so far before we let you go, because we'll have more football offseason news to talk about in the coming weeks as well. But I don't think we're too surprised by what happened at the Breslin. I mean, Michigan went in there against what's the premier program in the Big Ten without by far its best scorer, one of the best perimeter wing scorers in the entire country, in Isaiah Livers, and we don't know now when he's going to be back with that groin injury. So if you're looking for a couple of signs of life, because we have seen Michigan now go 0-3 in true road games, and they've all pretty much looked the same problem, lack of transition baskets, horrible shooting overall, and especially from the three-point line. Michael, Michigan is 11 of 60. 11 of 60. And it's 3 true road games from 3 at Michigan State, at Louisville, and at Illinois. Now, 2 of those teams are 2 of the best defensive programs in the country year in and year out. But still, with your eyes closed, just based on muscle memory, if you stood at the three-point line and threw up 60 shots, you might make 11. Okay, Michigan is 11 of 60 from 3 in those games. So I think that ominous trend continued. There were a couple of things that I liked, though. I liked Juwan just said, I've had enough. And then I liked the way the team responded. I mean, when Austin Davis, who by the way is playing some pretty good basketball right now for Michigan off the bench, when it appeared he got fouled, no call. Okay, that happens on the road. But then when he kind of got shoved back down to the ground when he tried to get back up, and then no call there, and Juwan basically stormed the court. And he even said after the game, I'd had enough. Something needed to be said. And then I liked the way that, because that's kind of the first time we've seen him sort of exert that fiery persona that he was known for as a player. He's been pretty, Rico Suave, calm, cool, and collected so far for the most part. All right. That was really the first time we saw Fab Five Juwan. And I was fascinated how the team was going to respond. Well, I turned the game off right about that point because they're down by 16. John Tessie got 4 fouls. And I'm like, I don't want to watch a bloodletting on a Sunday. They actually came back and cut the deficit to single digits a couple of times. We're talking about culture building with football earlier. Those are the signs you're kind of looking for what you think a team might be capable of when they get back to full strength. But what are your thoughts?
Yeah, no, I like that they didn't give up in this game, that they fought and clawed their way back to 8. I would have liked to have seen, in the moments that they got it to 8 points, I would have liked to have seen Xavier Simpson as the senior, as the point guard, make sure that he ran the offense and got the ball in the best position to get a good looking shot. And I think twice Michigan got it to 8, and twice they had back-to-back possessions that were just dreadful, and turnovers or someone taking an ill-advised shot. And those are the moments that they've got to learn, hey, first of all, don't get behind. But if you do, and you're starting to play catch-up, you have a chance to grab momentum and really put a scare into some teams. And you got to capitalize on those moments. Going forward here, I think it's pretty simple. There's 3 players, as long as Isaiah Livers is out. I mean, John Teske is going to give you what John Teske is going to give you, and Xavier Simpson is going to try his hardest, but he's not a natural scorer. He's not a natural shooter, but he's going to give you what he's going to give you. And I think Brandon Johns and even Austin Davis are exerting some. They're showing some hustle. They're showing some ability to attack the basket down low. So I think you can count on those guys. The 3 players are Franz Wagner, David Julius, and Eli Brooks. Yep. And even though they're 3 different ages, Eli Brooks is a junior, David Julius is a sophomore, and Franz Wagner is a freshman, they're all being thrust into this role of, hey, look, we need you. We're counting on you. You got to be one of our best players. And all 3 of them, especially in those 3, those 3 true road games.
Yeah, they've been zeros in all 3 of them.
To some degree against Oregon. Yeah, they've all disappeared. Yep. They've all kind of shrunk from the moment. And so I don't know that all 3 of them are going to rise up and be someone that Michigan can
got to have one, though.
But you need at least one.
Yep.
Yeah, you got to have one, and you probably need to have 2, especially as long as Isaiah Livers is out. And I think the best 2 most likely are DeJulius and Franz Wagner, because I think DeJulius has kind of like that bulldog mentality. Now, for whatever reason, he did not attack the basket. He seemed uninterested. He seemed intimidated in the first half. Eli Brooks seemed intimidated for the entire game at Michigan State. And you you know what, a guy in his third year, and he's been one of the pleasant surprises this season, but a guy in his third year going into East Lansing has the most experience of anyone. If he completely shrinks from the moment, it might be a little bit too late in his career to say, well, he's going to completely, change his spots and become an aggressive, fierce, ferocious player in some of these moments. So I think it's more likely that David DeJulius and Franz Wagner are those two players. And so, but they've got to get in the mindset, and that's got to be Juwan Howard's challenge. Is I need these two guys to be mentally tough, and the rest of the season is going to be dictated by how those two guys or Eli Brooks performs, because you can't. I mean, what did they total score? I think they scored like 8 points, 10 points in the game.
Marcus Bingham.
In the first half, they scored.
Marcus Bingham at Michigan State. He's still trying to find a role. He had for them at halftime. He had 5 points. That was more points than Franz Wagner, Eli Brooks. Well, basically, it's more points than the whole Michigan team, other than Teskey, Simpson, and Brandon Johns had combined. Okay, at halftime. Yep. You can't have that. And
no, you just can't have it.
And Eli Brooks, if you look at his stat line, every couple of years it seems like we have this barometer player. The year that Michigan got to the finals in 2013, every game that Glenn Robinson III scored double figures, Michigan went undefeated. A couple of years ago, it was whenever Duncan Robinson scored more than 6 points, Michigan didn't lose until the national championship game. If you go back and look this year, every time Eli Brooks has hit at least 2 3-pointers, Michigan has won. And every time he hasn't, they've lost. And what tends to happen with him is if he makes an early three, the whole rest of his game and aura changes. Mm-hmm. And if he doesn't, it crushes him. And you just get players that are like that sometimes, even in their third year. But at this point, he's got to figure out how else can I contribute to this team if my shot's not falling or I can't get it off. He can't just, you can understand why a Franz Wagner and David DeJulius just played garbage time last year. And he's just now learning how to be one of those players. But you cannot have a guy that's played a lot of minutes for you, who has started over Xavier Simpson at times in his career. He can't be a guy that if his first 2 or 3 threes don't fall, just is a zero for you the rest of the game. You can't get that out of Eli Brooks, can't?
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, it's I mean, you need more. You can't win a lot of basketball games with 2, maybe 3 players performing up to their potential. You need a lot more than that, and that's what we saw during the Bahamas when Michigan was down there for Thanksgiving, and they beat Gonzaga and they beat North Carolina. You had everybody playing well. Now you're not going to have everybody playing well and in sync the entire season. I mean, that's
especially in this league.
That's what you hope to do. You get hot in the spring and you take off and you're playing your best basketball. But if Michigan's going to survive January and February and be a slightly better than 500 team in the Big Ten, they've got to have a couple more of these guys hit on a consistent basis.
Especially in a league that I think it's possible could have 10 or 11 bids to the NCAA tournament. I think it's possible. I mean, the depth of this league is absolutely incredible. And we'll get more into that too as the winter progresses. Always good to talk to you, my friend. Thanks for joining us again this week on Michigan Podcast.
All right. Thank you so much.
You bet. We'll come back, wrap things up here in just a moment. Don't forget, you can stay up to date with everything we talk about here on Michigan Podcast in between episodes by visiting our website at WolverineDigest.com. Again, that's WolverineDigest.com. Myself, Michael Spath, and Brandon Brown keep you up to date each and every day on everything trending and happening with the Maize and Blue. So again, if you want to stay up to date on those Michigan Wolverines, go to WolverineDigest.com. Again, that's WolverineDigest.com. This week's Twitter poll, we asked you, what will Michigan's football record be in 2020? Something with 3 losses or something with 4 losses? And it was pretty much split 50-50 because it's going to be one of those two, and who knows which one it will be. All right, that's just how we roll around here. Sadly, it's just our way. Which brings us to this week's question of the week from Greg. Steve, did you know Rutgers has more bowl wins the past 20 years than Michigan? How do you explain that? Tragically so. Greg, that's That's how I would explain it. That's not Greg Schiano saying that to his assistant. Although, you know what? If it is, respect. I can respect that. I think a lot of it has to do with Michigan as a brand is so powerful that it tends to get elevated for television exposure in these postseason matchups, and so ends up having to fight over its weight more often than when Rutgers goes to some Fleabag bowl game and plays another Fleabag team. All right. So, Michigan often gets put into these elite bowl settings when it's really right now an upper middle class team. It's kind of living in that neighborhood that's really nice, but outside the gated community. But because Michigan's such a powerful brand with a massive fan base, it gets put into these gated community games where it's overmatched. I think that has more to do with Michigan's bowl record than anything else. I think, for example, had Michigan played Auburn, not taking anything away from what Minnesota did, because Auburn's a good team and so is Minnesota. But I think it's a far higher likelihood Michigan would have won that game than if you put Minnesota up against Alabama, for example. So I think Michigan getting overrated for television matchups because of its brand, Greg, has as much to do with that bowl record as anything else. But thanks for for the question. Good question. That'll do it for this week's episode of Michigan Podcast. Don't forget, Wednesday debuts the new thing we're starting here as well, Bigger 10. When we look at the Big Ten, from just beyond the maize and blue, every other school in the Big Ten as well, the other 13. Here's a preview. Steve Deace from Michigan Podcast. And boy, has our channel here grown quite a bit in the past year. And a lot of that growth, fans of other Big Ten teams. If you're one of those fans, I've got good news for you. Coming in January, in addition to Michigan Podcast, we'll be launching a brand new show called Bigger 10, with all of the same kind of analysis you get at Michigan Podcast, but with all of the other Big Ten teams and storylines involved as well, right here on this channel. So like, subscribe. Coming in January, Bigger 10.